Hey everybody, I'm Quence, and you're about to watch my personal top 10 favorite TV shows from the year 2022. Just like with my top 10 movies list, I'll be running through the 10 TV shows from last year, the 10 new TV shows from last year that I thought were the best, that I enjoyed the most watching. Not returning seasons of existing shows, I'm only focusing on the first, or in some cases, only seasons of brand new shows. Unlike my movie list, I watch a lot less TV generally than I do movies, partially because it takes 2 hours to watch a movie and sometimes 10 or 12 hours or more to watch a TV show. That being said, I feel pretty good about this list, and I think these are all excellent shows. You can also find the list in written form on my Substack newsletter. Check out a link in the description below. I got no special awards for these. I am going to jump right in to my 10 favorite shows of the year, starting with number 10, The Patient. This is a limited series. It's just 8 episodes, I think. There's not going to be a season 2. And it stars Steve Carell and Domhnall Gleeson. That's right, Kylo Ren himself. He plays a troubled fellow, let's say, who is in therapy and decides the best way for him to deal with his issues is to, small spoilers for episode 1 of The Patient, by the way, kidnap his therapist and keep him locked up inside his home in order to have a hostage therapist. So anytime he needs it, he goes and talks to him. Both leads give fantastic performances in this show, and they kind of have to, because this is a show that really relies on its actors. There are no flashy sets or anything like that. Mostly the show takes place in a single room, with the exception of a few parts here and there, a lot of flashbacks, but largely you are just dealing with these two people talking to each other in one room. So they really had to bring their A games, and they do. I think especially Domhnall Gleeson, I mean, he gets maybe the flashier part, the more interesting part, but both are really fascinating characters. And another element that I really appreciated was Steve Carell is a Jewish fella on this show. I'm somewhat of a Jewish fella myself from time to time. And that Jewishness is a major part of his backstory. It's this really fascinating examination of Jewish culture from a perspective that I have never seen in a show or movie. It's not just about Judaism in general. It takes a very interesting approach to it, and one almost very specific niche aspect of it that, again, I've just never really seen explored without the show necessarily feeling like, oh, this is a show about religion. In fact, that stuff doesn't even really come into play until a few episodes in, and you start to realize what's been happening with Steve Carell's character. But I love the way that was woven in without it feeling in any way heavy-handed. The Patient really nails the icky gray area of good/bad people. Are you rooting for Gleason's character to get better? Do you hate him? Do you think he's a terrible person? I almost got like Stockholm Syndrome in TV form, which I think happens with a lot of people with problematic characters on TV shows. It's like when the actors are good, the characters are charismatic, you kind of like them even if they're doing bad things. And this is a show that really tests those limits for the audience and makes you think about what's good and bad. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm just a freak and everybody thinks this guy is absolutely terrible, which objectively maybe he is. I guess I can't blame anyone for that. But I don't know. If you haven't watched the show, you could watch it and decide. For me, it was very much the kind of show that was hard to stop watching because each episode ends on a dramatic cliffhanger of some kind. It's a quick watch. Each episode's only like 30 minutes or so. So just a really easy, fun, and at times troubling watch. My number 9 show of 2022 is The Bear. The Bear is about a guy whose brother has died, and he is now in the position of running his struggling Chicago beef restaurant, where he has to come in and get things up to snuff. He is coming from the world of high cuisine in New York City, working for very fancy chefs at fancy restaurants, and now he's trying to bring some of that sensibility to this comparatively lower class, you might say, more for the people kind of beef sandwich restaurant. Although still at one point this place was highly acclaimed, it has fallen into disrepair, it's losing popularity, and he's trying to bring it back up to speed. This is a high-octane, high-intensity show It's been compared to the movie Uncut Gems in terms of the anxiety that it induces in you. And I think that's a pretty accurate description. I don't think it's quite that high anxiety. It's still in a restaurant. It's not that insane, but that gives you kind of a good sense of the tone of the show. And you do really see the amount of stress involved in the kitchen of a restaurant. You know, the stakes might be lower than in something like Uncut Gems when you step back and examine it from afar, but in the moment, in the heat of it, clearly there's nothing more important than the functioning of this kitchen and the functioning of this restaurant. And I know for people who have worked in kitchens like this before, this show can kind of give you a little bit of PTSD. It might be a little triggering because it really does just have this, oh my God, we gotta go, very scary energy to it that will put you on edge. In particular, there's one episode later in the season that was done entirely in one shot, or at least it's shot to look that way. And who doesn't love a good one shot of anything? It's an extremely well done episode. And everything is well done in this show. The characters I love, and I love the way they are written. Every choice that they make, every situation feels natural. Very little of it feels scripted in terms of the character behavior. It doesn't feel like they're prioritizing, what the actors want, for example, but rather what is best for the show and what makes most sense to happen in this world. The first season ends on a great note, and I can't wait to see what they do with it in season 2. Next is number 8, and that is Our Flag Means Death. This is a Taika Waititi show, and that guy can do no wrong. It also stars Rhys Darby, who I love. He's just a hilarious, sweet, charismatic guy, but I feel like until now he hasn't really had a chance to be a leading man, and this show is his starring vehicle, and he nails it. It's a pirate show that begins as this very silly parody about a guy who is trying to be a pirate but clearly is not cut out for it. But very quickly it convinces you to fall in love with these characters and to care about it in a way that goes beyond just a silly parody. And I think it's a tough line to walk between weird comedy and actual pirate show, but they do it. They don't beat around the bush. They don't avoid the messier aspects of pirating, the murdering and all that kind of stuff. That is an aspect of it, and there's a palpable sense of danger to this show, which I think also helps make it funnier. One thing I really loved about it is the way that they handle the plots and the narratives. There are multiple times in the season, at least 3 or 4 times, where a plot that I thought was going to go on for a few episodes at least gets wrapped up, and then a new arc begins right after that. And especially, in the modern age of streaming shows, when so often you see concepts stretched out to fill an entire season, and it feels like, shouldn't this have ended already? But they just want to just squeeze whatever they can out of that storyline. This show is not afraid to just say, no, that storyline is over now. You kind of see what's coming. You understand where this is going. Great, so do we. We're cutting it there. We've resolved it. And now that we have done that, now what happens? Where do these characters go from here now that they've made that decision, now that that thing has happened? And it keeps you on your toes, it makes it less predictable, and it just allows them to have more fun and shake things up. Almost to the point where I was like, wait, maybe they need to slow down actually a little bit. I'm not sure how they're going to keep adding new stuff to this and keep this show going the way they're doing this. Sometimes it really feels like they are closing the book on certain plot lines. But I trust in these writers and creators. They're really smart. The show is really funny. It's also touching. It's sentimental. It's got a very unique tone that you're not going to see in most other shows. Next, at number 7, I have Players. Players is a fake documentary, a scripted documentary-style fictional show about esports players, specifically competitive League of Legends players. The main character uses the handle of Cream Cheese, and he is a former League of Legends champ who sort of had a fall from grace and is now trying to stage his comeback with some new team members. Now, I am not a fan of the League of Legends game. I honestly know almost nothing about it. I am not a MOBA person. I hardly even understand how they work. But I still loved this show. And the show does not dumb it down either. The show is not, there's no scene in the beginning where they have a guy go, League of Legends, how do you play? Well, here's a step-by-step. They don't do that. They do not hold your hand. They give you just enough information, all you need to understand what is going on, as if you were watching a football movie. They're not going to have a scene where they explain the game of football to you, but you're attached to the characters. They want to score a goal. Like, you see the crowd cheering, so you know when something good or bad happened based on that. And you can figure it out from context, even if you're not immersed in that world. What's important here is the characters themselves. Just like I love, speaking of football again, the show Friday Night Lights. I don't care about football, but you're attached to the characters and the drama of that, and that makes you care about whether or not they lose the game. The show is set up like a comedy, and it definitely is largely a comedy. There's a lot of funny moments, but I think it values the realism of the show more than the opportunity for jokes. It is shot in this documentary style, and it feels very realistic. I think for the most part, if you told somebody that this wasn't scripted, they might believe you. It's pretty convincingly done. Now, the season more or less does follow a fairly traditional sports underdog story, but there are plenty of little twists and turns along the way in regards to the specific characters, their teams, and their interpersonal relationships. And what's fascinating too is the way the show is told. Each episode reveals new details about characters' pasts. They're either from a different character's perspective, or they're now focusing on this one element that's been hinted at or alluded to, but hasn't really been fleshed out yet. And each episode enlightens you further and makes you better understand the motivations of these characters. I think it would be a really good one to do a rewatch on for that reason, because by the end of the show, some characters you didn't like, or some characters you didn't even realize were in the background all the time, you now are attached to and have a better understanding of. A really smart show, and again, just kind of amazing that it's a show about esports video game players, something that I really don't care about even as a video game fan. I really don't have interest in that world in real life, but they made it compelling and fascinating to watch no matter what your interest in that is. My number 6 top TV show is Fleischman is in Trouble, which is based on a book, I believe, of the same name. In this one, Jesse Eisenberg plays a recently divorced dad who is exploring his newfound freedom, so to speak, in New York City, and the show is narrated by his friend, a character played by Lizzie Kaplan, who I also love from Party Down. This is a great New York show. It really gives you the vibes of that city. The producers of the show are the writers/directors of movies like Little Miss Sunshine, and I think their work is always great. I don't know that they truly get talked about enough, besides maybe in the context of Little Miss Sunshine, but I really enjoy everything they do, and you can kind of feel that sensibility on this show. It's this mix of comedy and drama. It's sentimental at times, but there's enough irony and bitterness so that does not overwhelm you. And this is a show that really plays around with perspectives. It begins following Jesse Eisenberg's character. I mean, the show is mainly about him, but it really starts in a different place from where it ends up. You're not really sure after a point who or what is this show about. Whose perspective are we interested in? Who are the heroes? Who are the villains? That changes a lot as the season goes on. It's very smart. I think it forces you to consider aspects of your own life from that angle. It makes you maybe re-examine situations that you've experienced and think, what was it like from the other person's view versus mine? And which is, even though the show has a very specific tone and it's talking about specific characters of a certain age and a certain period in their lives, that overall concept is very relatable, very broad, and could be applied to anybody. And it's another one that I think really hooks you, keeps you wanting to watch each episode from week to week or just all in a row because they're all finished now. Pulls you along with these interesting little hooks. Almost at times feels kind of like a mystery show because there are a couple of mysteries going on, even though it is, for the most part, a very grounded dramedy about actual characters. Fleischman is in trouble. Definitely recommend it. Check it out. My number 5 TV show is The After Party. This comes from creator Chris Miller and his usual partner, Phil Lord. I think at least writes one or two of the episodes as well, but it's mainly a Chris Miller show. But these are the two guys who gave us things like Clone High and 21 Jump Street and the Lego Movie and so many fantastic things. I mean, I don't know that I don't love anything that they have had their hands in. And this show is no exception. It's a murder mystery that takes place during the after party of a high school reunion. And one of the classmates has been killed, and the whole show takes place with the cop interviewing each individual suspect. The twist, though, is that each episode goes into the point of view of a different character as they retell the story of what happened that night. And each episode is framed like a different style of movie. So one could be like a rom-com, one could be like a horror movie. I actually don't think there's a horror movie episode, but you get the idea. So each time you have a totally different genre parody, which is perfect for Chris Miller because that's exactly what he excels at in movies like 21 Jump Street. And it's also this Rashomon kind of thing because you're seeing a different perspective each episode, and it's a great way to reveal new clues and new details while still keeping you guessing because you don't know who's telling the truth. After I finished watching the show, I looked online and I saw that people who were watching the show in real time pretty much figured out what the mystery answer was quickly. I am stupid and I try not to think about these things. So for me, I thought it was a satisfying conclusion that I didn't see coming until maybe the last episode. But, you know, some people probably will. That's fine. I thought it was a well put together mystery. And most importantly, it's super funny. I had a blast watching every episode, seeing which character they were going to focus on that episode and what their style of movie would be. I think is a great way to flesh out these characters. It really gives you an interesting window into their personalities. And it's also just an excuse for the writer and director to play around and have fun and do interesting things and creatively pay homage to these different genres of movie. It also includes 3 absolute bangers. I think there's 3, maybe there's 4 in a musical episode that I just love. That was my favorite episode for me personally because it's a lot of fun music. I'm a musical guy. So that show is The After Party. They are doing a season 2 on this one, and I'm curious how that's going to work because probably you want to keep some or most, if not all, of the same cast, but is it going to feel contrived for them to have another murder mystery happen to them? Maybe that's the point. Maybe they comment on that as it happens. Whatever it is, I trust Chris Miller above anyone else to turn something that maybe I'm skeptical about into something that's great. Next up, it's my number 4 TV show of 2022, and that's The Rehearsal. The Rehearsal is Nathan Fielder's follow-up show to Nathan For You, which I think is one of the best shows of all time. I think Nathan Fielder is absolutely a comedic genius, maybe just a genius, period. And The Rehearsal begins as a fairly standard Nathan For You-esque premise, wherein Nathan is going to find people and allow them to rehearse parts of their lives they are nervous about before carrying them out in real life with hidden cameras. So you think that each episode is going to be that format, that you're going to find a new person, watch them rehearse, and watch them try to complete whatever goal they are struggling with. But very quickly, it's only a 6-episode show, and pretty much by episode 2, if not 3, that format is out the window, and it's developing into something completely different, wild, and unpredictable, while still maintaining elements of that core premise. It goes off the rails. And at first I found that very jarring, and I wasn't sure that I liked it or understood it. But by the end, I was with it, and I even rewatched this show because it's pretty short, not that hard to rewatch, and it really clicked for me even more on that second watch. I think it makes perfect sense the direction that it goes in. This is Nathan Fielder elevating his style to a new level. This is not just goofy pranks and sketch comedy. This is saying something about who we are as people, our anxieties, what we're afraid of, and why we work so hard to prepare for things. And then even by the end of the show, the themes pivot again. They do a lot about the ethics of child acting, for instance. So it goes to a lot of different places. My only complaint really is that I wish the episodes were longer. I wish they were twice as long, because I think there's a lot more room to explore these concepts, and I'm sure there's a lot that ended up on the cutting room floor. But it's an HBO show, and it's not like they are bound to a specific length. They could have gone longer if they wanted to, so presumably they decided this was the best way to present the show. I'm just greedy, and I want more. Nathan also really makes himself the focus of the show by the end of it. And that's a whole other fascinating topic of who is Nathan Fielder really? Is this the real him? How much of this show is staged or, rehearsed versus what is real? And that's part of the charm and the magic of Nathan Fielder, is the blurring of that line and trying to understand where he begins and the character ends. Is, how much crossover is there? Sometimes it seems like there isn't any. It's really fascinating, and I have no idea where this show is going to go for season 2, which was confirmed. I would have thought it maybe was a limited series, but he's doing more. Feels like they could do anything with this one. And for my number 3 show, they finally got it right. It's Andor on Disney+. This is a return to form for Star Wars after the very disappointing Boba Fett and Obi-Wan shows, which I found to be abysmal. The Mandalorian has its issues, but I think it's a fine show. And those were just sunk right down into a pit. This show lifts it back up, I think really has, for many lapsed Star Wars fans, put this series back into a positive place. Comes from Tony Gilroy, who worked heavily on Rogue One, and takes a character from Rogue One, played by Diego Luna, whose name is Cassian Andor, who it seemed like a joke when they announced this show. Like, nobody cared about that character. I liked Rogue One fine, but its character work was not its strong point, and I never would have told you I had an interest in seeing a whole show about Cassian Andor. And yet, they have completely justified its existence. The characters on this show are deadly serious and relatable and realistic, and you feel for them, especially with the premise of the show. It's really focusing all about the inner workings of the rebellion versus the inner workings of the Empire. And it puts into perspective that whole thing. I think over time in Star Wars that sort of devolved into just a silly backdrop, an excuse to make action figures mash up against each other. But in this show, it's presented as a very real, terrifying premise. They nail this bureaucracy of fascist authorities, and they do not shy away from the darker aspects of what it means to have a rebellion. Even in a sci-fi world, you have to get messy sometimes. And these rebels, not all of them arguably are heroes. Many of them at best are anti-heroes that do bad things for the greater good of the rebellion. Sometimes, sacrifice things in their own lives, and sometimes have to do things to hurt other people in order to further the agenda of the rebellion. This is a show that opens with its main character in the first 10 minutes or so murdering 2 cops, and he's the protagonist of the show. And I knew right there this is not going to be like most other Disney Star Wars shows. I am in for a ride here. It's got some of the most creative and clever ideas and set pieces I've seen in the Star Wars universe in recent memory. I particularly liked the prison arc, which showcases, I think, one of the coolest, most interesting sci-fi prisons I've ever seen. I could have watched a whole show of that prison. I hope there's a spin-off or a book or a comic book or something that takes place there, because the design of it is just great. I mean, the effects, the look of this show is incredible. And it's another one like Our Flag Means Death that isn't afraid to end its plot lines when they're over, rather than stretching them out. There's basically a few mini arcs on this show that come to natural conclusions before a new thing begins, and it's done very, very well. It's kind of remarkable they got away with this show. It feels like they got away with something for a Disney Plus show for how good it is and how honest it is. Worth watching if you're a diehard Star Wars fan or not. And now my number 2 favorite show. That one is Peacemaker. Peacemaker is the spin-off show of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which was one of my favorite movies from last year. I love James Gunn. I thought that movie was brilliant, but I will admit, I was not excited for the concept of a spin-off show about the character Peacemaker played by John Cena. I just didn't find that character to be the highlight of the movie. I thought he was fine, but not so interesting I wanted a show about him. But hey, just like Andor, James Gunn said, we're going to prove you wrong. We're going to take this character that maybe wasn't that well fleshed out, and we're going to give him a chance to shine. And John Cena is an actor I've actually really enjoyed. I think he's fantastic at both comedy and drama and demonstrates both in this show. And just like the movie The Suicide Squad was, just like most of Gunn's other works are, Peacemaker is a perfect blend of surreal, over-the-top, violent slapstick and gross-out humor with heart and sentiment. These are characters that you really care about, and they're also complicated. You love them in spite of or because of their flaws. Case in point, Peacemaker, in the movie, he's kind of a bad guy. He's a murderer. He's not very nice. They took someone that I really didn't care about and made him completely lovable. And that's true, again, of almost all the main characters on this show. You really love them even though they are often messy, complicated, broken people. And I think that's kind of James Gunn's specialty, is taking those types of characters and making them shine. The show is shot in a way that is unlike most other DC, certainly any Marvel shows. You know, I really liked She-Hulk from this year, but you compare this show to something like Ms. Marvel or Moon Knight, and it's night and day. It's such a breath of fresh air. It has this immediate feel to it. It feels real. It feels urgent. It feels, forgive me, visceral. It's unlike any other superhero media, and it's not afraid to explore these super out there sci-fi concepts, not afraid to potentially alienate people by being too weird or by being too offensive or ugly or gross. It's all those things, and that makes you love it even more because it's not afraid to be what it is. Also, the soundtrack, just banger after banger after banger. Kudos to James Gunn, I love Peacemaker. But my favorite TV show of last year, my number 1 pick, is Severance. This is not just my favorite show from 2022, it's one of my favorite shows of all time at this point. If you don't know, this stars Adam Scott, who plays a guy who works at an office. You don't really know what his job is. It's sort of mysterious, but he has taken part in what is called the Severance program, which is a sci-fi way of separating your work and home lives completely. So I would recommend going into this show blind, but if you don't care or if you've seen it already, essentially they separate your personality, your brain, into 2 parts, so that when you go to work, you don't know what's happening, and then when you clock out, you just get to enjoy your life. So it's as if you're in a coma while you are at work, and you never have to think about that aspect of your job. You just get some money and you're happy. Meanwhile, there's now another person, another part of you that exists, that is working every single day, and you don't know on what. It's a really smart commentary on that concept of work-life balance and what that actually means. Of course, it's a critique of capitalism and the oppressive nature of employment in our country. And it's also just an awesome sci-fi mystery show, reminiscent to me of the best parts of a show like Lost. It is perfectly done with this foreshadowing throughout the show, slowly stringing you along by giving you new clues and new information as to what the hell is going on. And by the end of it, making you want to do a rewatch because now you have a better understanding and you want to look for even more clues and pick up on all the things that you missed. I can't remember the last time I saw a show like this that made me this anxious for the next episode every single time. When I watched episode 8, I thought it was the finale, and I was so anxious and upset. I wanted more, and then I discovered I was wrong. There's an episode 9. I can't tell you the feeling of joy that I had in that moment, that I had another hour to spend in the world of this show. I was completely obsessed with it from start to finish. Now, I am definitely a sucker for this kind of thing, this genre. I love sci-fi dystopia stuff that involves characters making discoveries about their surroundings. It's sort of reminiscent of the video game Portal and several other things that I really, really love. And it's executed so well. You've got fantastic turns here from all of the actors involved. I've always loved Adam Scott, but he shows range in a dramatic sense that I haven't seen him do before. I mean, you have small parts from Christopher Walken and John Turturro that are excellent. Everybody in the show is excellent. And this show was created by Ben Stiller, who I think it's about time he finally gets his due as a writer and director, coming from, for me, the extremely underrated The Cable Guy and some of the other stuff that he's worked on. You know, people think of Zoolander, people think of Meet the Parents. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for his directing capabilities, but I think that's changing now with the show because it was a pretty big hit, and deservedly so. It's such a fantastic show. I'm a little bit nervous about what they're going to do with the next seasons and how they're going to continue to keep this concept going. But I have faith in the creators based on how strong this season was that they will find a way to pull it off. And those are my top 10 favorite shows from 2022. I think the big winner here is probably FX/Hulu, because they had a bunch of shows on my list, including The Bear and The Patient and Fleischman is in Trouble. And then, HBO Max had Peacemaker and Our Flag Means Death. Definitely the big streaming services. Apple TV had a couple good ones on here. None of my shows on this list came from Netflix, I will say, although I did enjoy The Midnight Club. I enjoyed The Sandman quite a bit, and Cabinet of Curiosities as well. None of those were strong enough to make my personal list, though. So Netflix, you're slipping. Step it up. Otherwise, fantastic year for TV, in my opinion. I highly recommend all these shows, and what's great is that a lot of them are just relatively short, 8 or 10 episodes, some of them only 30 minutes an episode, so it's not that hard to catch up and check most or all of them out if you want to. Let me know in the comments what you thought about these shows, if you watched any of them, what you think about my ordering of them. And again, you can check out the written version of this. I don't know why you would if you watched the end of this video, but you can. Or all my other links to what I do in the description below. Thanks, everybody, and happy watching.